of both men and women, we are, yes, shocking. We are actually starting to see that there's a movement towards including gender considerations into security analysis, security issues, and which means for most of us that security is the definition of security is broadened to include human security, and that also means that there's a new range of policy and approaches to internal and external security threats being identified. And so this afternoon we have Ljiljana talking about NATO's approach to these issues, and we also have Matt talking about the U.S. approach to some of these issues. So there are two different approaches, and we're going to look at also how effective these approaches have been. So please feel free to ask questions after they present. So first, I just briefly introduce Captain Ljiljana Bjelic, who Ljiljana and I worked together on a project with NATO for gender training. And among her many roles at NATO, she's also a commissioned officer in the French Army and a specialist in Balkan affairs, and is a specialist in training on intel issues. Matt Pottinger is currently an Edward Murrow Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and was in Afghanistan. While in Afghanistan in 2009, he co-founded and trained the Marine Corps' first female engagement teams, and he's also served as a Marine in Iraq and Afghanistan, also as a captain. Right. Yes. Okay. So, would you like to start?
I'll start. I'll go with STEM. No, I'll say because we'll start with a small video before I have to speak. It is a video we created in ACT. ACT is Allied Command Transformation. It's a headquarters based in Norfolk, Virginia. One of the two main commands. So one is in Norfolk, the other one is operational, is in Brussels. So that's something we created for the 8th of March, International Women's Day, and it was running in the lobby and all around the headquarters. So I'll let you
March the 8th, 2011 will mark the 100th anniversary of International Women's Day. It is a global day celebrating the economic, political, and social achievements of women past, present, and future. With over 300,000 women serving in NATO's armed forces, NATO's Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen calls for more attention to be given to women's concerns in NATO operations. Allied Command Transformation is leading the way by developing a comprehensive training approach.
We try with our training to prepare not only gender advisors, but at the end everybody who goes into mission with our pre-deployment training, prepare him for these challenges and to understand why gender is not just political correct.
In November 2010, Allied Command Transformation hosted a gender training workshop. U.S. Navy Vice Admiral Carol Pottinger discusses the role of the workshop.
About how we train our forces, how we establish the cultural mindset of diversity that is so critical to the most effective military force out there. It's not just about stuff and missile development. It's not just about missile defense and cyber defense. It's about manning, training, and equipping our forces to do the best they can. And obviously, this issue, this ability of our military forces to go operate and culturally, and to be sensitive and to understand and to have the awareness and training to operate appropriately in this culture is also all about military development.
Women play a crucial role in NATO every day by bridging the cultural gap to women and children in many countries around the world.
How can we improve the relationship with women, but also at the same time with men and with all the community, which will help the commander to improve the operation and build some kind of better relationship with the population.
Allied Command Transformation is currently focusing on education with events scheduled for March the 25th, 2011 that will highlight the reasons the command should support the goals of UN Security Resolution 1325, not just in words, but also in action. For Allied Command Transformation, this is U.S. Navy Chief Chris Carruthers.
That was his choice. Yeah. Okay, I'm very happy to see a lot of people, different ages, different interests, and it's nice. But it's still a small group, so I have here something that's mainly prepared for a large audience, and I'll go probably very quickly to that in order not to forget something important. But I prefer that we discuss later, that maybe I tell you my stories and my experience and what we exactly do in NATO, instead of staying too much on theory and papers and documents, etc. So I'm Captain Bjelic, Ljiljana, from the French Army. I've been appointed to NATO ACT Norfolk since August 2009. Let's say that I work in gender since September last year, but I use it more or less in my everyday work before. I never called it gender, but it was part of my reflection, and I integrated it in my everyday work as an intel analyst and intel officer. So I'll go through this very quickly. So Sahana, First, I will show you a few slides without saying anything, just to tell you, to show you that people are really working a lot right now on gender. So, I don't know, I would just, say, I don't know if you know what NATO is. It's not the purpose of this briefing, but you have to know what it is. It's a military alliance of 28 different nations, European and North American. So when you work in NATO, you have to be aware that, you know, you have different opinions, different way of doing things, of thinking, you know, so, and gender is not one of the easiest topic to talk about. So, that's important to know. I'll go through these things. The last one we just saw it before is the International Women's Day video. I'll just say a few words about the Resolution 1325 and gender. Few key terms and the background, because you probably see it very often and more. The action plans within NATO and in ACT where I work. So the gender, we call it the gender roadmap, and we have a lot of tasks right now. And at the end, the operational impact, which is the most important for us. So why the Resolution 1325 and gender? Maybe you saw in the video just before, it's now the 10th anniversary of this resolution, and in the military we didn't move much, especially NATO. I won't say for other nations, because some nations improved and worked a lot on gender, but NATO didn't really follow. So the actual Secretary General, Rasmussen, is very keen.
Copies.
Yes, so
Passing
she
the
has
resolution.
copies on the resolution if you want to know more. We realized that the impact of war and conflicts was huge on women and children, also on men, of course, but very often and more on women and children. And at the same time, so we publicly recognize that with this resolution, and we recognize also that we should involve women more and more in high-level decisions, reconstruction issues, etc., in order to build security and install some kind of stability. So these are all Secretary General words. He is working a lot on that, and I think now in April he will have a special conference on gender, and he will ask us how much we have done in NATO to introduce gender and the gender perspective and equality. I also brought some, but you are more than 10. The Gender Makes Sense booklet. It was done by the Cynic Center of Excellence. So if you don't have one here, you can go to the site on the internet and download it. It's a very, very good booklet. It was done in 2006, I think already, published in 2008. And it explains very well what is gender and how we work with gender in operations, in everyday military life. So take a look on this one, and if something is not clear after this conference, you will probably find your answers in this book. So these are a few key terms. Gender is something you already know, but you also very often hear this expression, gender perspective. So what's gender perspective? Gender awareness. Gender, what's gender? What gender? People think that gender, so especially in my headquarters, you know, they say, oh my God, stop talking about gender, it's sexual harassment thing about women and so on. And it's very difficult to explain them that it has nothing to do with it. It's not only that, because we have some issues with, of course, sexual harassment, but not only women, but also men now. Rapes, which is not new, within the militaries, in a conflict, everywhere. Not only women are raped, but also men, more and more men. But what's funny is that when we speak about rapes, men rape, we don't speak about rape. We call it torture. And we don't talk about it, it's taboo. Even when I worked with the UN and we started to establish some kind of training package that we would develop together with UN and some other institution in order to give it to nations, we had a lot of difficulties to introduce men rape issue and homosexual issue, and that's also part of gender. So you see, it's very hard, but let's start with female first, because we still have a lot of work. What is gender perspective? Gender perspective, for example, when you buy a house, if you're married, and do you talk with your wife? Do you think you will probably find a better solution if you discuss with your wife or not?
Yes.
She will give you, she will give you her female perspective, and you will give her yours, of course, and she will think about other stuff you probably won't think
she'll
about.
tell you what house you can buy.
Yeah, she will probably have to ask when, especially, I can talk about this because I worked as an intel analyst, and we have to introduce, and look, we cannot forget the female, the women, because if we forget women, we forget 50% of the population. That's one thing. And what gives a great result when you do your analysis, intel analysis, is to work in a mixed team with men. And I mostly had a different view and opinion on the same topic that my male colleague had. But at the end, we found what was the most objective and the most realistic answer. What was the most realistic answer to an issue. So I think it really, really works well. Some background. So I already talked about 1325. The answer, NATO's answer to this resolution was only a in 2007, so 7 years later, with the NATO EAPC policy, which gave birth to the NATO Bi-Strategic Directive 40-1. And we work on this one right now. So we created a NATO action plan, ACT has an action plan, and ACO in Brussels, Allied Command Operations, has also its own action plan on gender. Not only we have action plans, but 22 nations already signed or is about to sign a national gender action plan. They introduced the 1325 resolution into the national action plan. So you have 16 countries who already signed this action plan. So they introduce the gender perspective in everything they're doing, politics, economy, military, etc. And we have all these nations. So you see US, France too. We are late, but we are working on it right now. This was the 10th anniversary of the UN Security Resolution in Amsterdam. I participated in. Some nations, as I said before, started to work on gender before the UN Resolution 1325 within the military. And they are in Sweden. They have a completely different view on how to lead operations. And they introduced a lot of women in it. And the Dutch. The Dutch are right now creating a training together with the Spanish Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So they are working on a new training gender course, which will take place in Madrid, and the second one, and the second in a year, will be in Amsterdam. Sweden has a lot of gender advisors in Afghanistan. So that's something which is contradictory a little bit. We have gender advisors deployed everywhere. We have them in KFOR, in Kosovo. We have them in Afghanistan, in all the regional commands, AGCs. They are everywhere, and they are giving. They give advice to the commander on how to lead the operations. Not to forget some important thing when you develop your military plan. And we are late. We are not there. We are not helping them. We are not training them. So they go to Afghanistan and they're just in front. Oh, I'm a gender advisor. What's that? What am I supposed to do? And so thanks to Sweden, we have who are training on gender for years now. We were able to send those people to the Swedish military school to train them on the gender advisor work. And they're developing more and more. They are right now putting, I think, millions of euros in to create the Gender Center of Excellence together with two other countries, Finland and the third one.
I don't know, but
It's
supposed to launch in next January 2012.
Yes, 3 Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Finland, and probably Norway. They will work together and they will create this center. So they're putting a lot of money. They realize the impact and the effectiveness, operational effectiveness that the gender perspective is bringing. So that's something to follow. I think they will just open it in a few months. So they consider gender awareness is of vital importance to military operation, and they can say it because they use it, and they have the feedbacks. We have great feedback from the female engagement teams. We very often invite them to brief seminars because those girls are coming back with great stories. This is something I just mentioned before. This is a brand new article I just received about men rape, how many men were raped. I think NATO started to really realize the importance of gender perspective during the war in Balkans, in Bosnia. Do you remember how many women were raped there? They had camps where they were raping women, but also men. But we never. And I had some feedbacks from militaries who were there, French militaries who were there, and they didn't know how to react. What am I supposed to do? That's the main issue, I think, with the military. Where is the limit of the military work? Where is the limit of the humanitarian work? Where do I start? How do I react if I see a man or woman being raped? They don't know, and that's what every time when I speak about gender, they say, okay, but what am I supposed to do? We are making war, we are not making peace. But you probably have noticed in the last years, we are making more peace than war, and we are more and more confronted to these humanitarian disasters, and we ask the military to react on it. And we still don't know. We still don't know how to do it. So that's the most difficult thing, I think, and we should work a bit more on that part. I mean, we can speak about gender, but we should tell these people exactly what they can do. These are the 3 pillars, just to show you how it works in NATO. You have the NATO headquarters, the international staff, the international military staff, the political parts of all this that are giving us the directives. And we are then ACO, which is in charge of the operation, and ACT, we are the brain, writing doctrines, etc. So we are working on this right now. So the NATO action plan is focused on operational planning, training, operational execution, and reporting systems. And this is what we are doing in ACT right now, what I'm working on and with my team. So we are trying to include gender training in all education training facilities in every countries, 28 countries from NATO. So we already created a gender awareness 8-year module as a pre-deployment training to Afghanistan. So every military who's deployed to Afghanistan can follow this online. And you have a gender awareness course, so it's 45 unit modules. So that was the first step. Inclusion in curriculum for civilian people training. We have a lot of NATO civilians going to Afghanistan, and I went to Czech Republic last week to train them on gender, and I realized that some people were going there to work on some commercial thing, and they will probably sell things to Afghans, not only Afghans, but Afghan. They will have contacts with Afghan women who created some, who are working in Afghanistan. So we from NATO are sending people there to work with Afghan women on, commercial stuff. So the gender advisor post we will create the gender advisor post in 2012. It's going to be in our new structure. I don't know if you know, but NATO is we are decreasing in manpower. We are losing a lot of people, but we managed to add this one, and it's going to be at the same level. It's going to be on a policy level, so this person will be able to go and see directly the commander of the headquarters. So it's a great achievement. We have a website now on our ACT site. So you can, if you type ACT, NATO ACT, you can go there and what else? Everything moves, so I don't see anymore. Evaluation. The Gender Awareness Center of Excellence in Sweden will probably be accredited by NATO, so we'll be able to send our militaries on there to be trained too. We are trying to increase the awareness of on gender-related issues among our military, among our 28 nations, and that's really not easy, because I can tell you, when you have already the Greek-Turkish very difficult relationship they're all behaving very well, but if you introduce gender in it, it's even worse. You introduce it in a different manner. Okay. And this is more about gender and security. So how can we improve security with gender? What can female military do in Afghanistan or in Kosovo or whenever they go? I think in Libya we'll have the same issue if we deploy people there. Female military personnel are needed to perform body searches on women. They're the only one who can do that, you know. And so they're doing a great job. Local men and women tend to see female soldiers more as a peacekeeper than a soldier, even if those women are wearing weapons and all this stuff, but they don't look as aggressive as men. So what's happening right now is that when those girls go to an Afghan village, they don't only have women they don't only talk with women, they can go and see women, they can go and enter into the rooms. Maybe if they need to search something, they can do that. But men also are coming and they're talking to these female soldiers more easier than to male soldiers. If they have any rape issues or any other issues, they will go and see a female soldier for that. Very often they see those female soldiers as the third gender. They don't consider them at all as women. So, but sometimes they're very, you know, they're very tender toward them. So what happened several times, they would call the girl, they would fall in love with her, blah, blah, blah. They would like her a lot, and they would tell her, don't take this road because there are some IEDs over there. They will do everything to make you walk. Take this road, don't do that because something could happen to you. And that helps a lot. I mean, for security reasons, it's important to have. I don't think, that's my personal opinion, I don't think we should have 100% female or 100% male teams. I don't think that would bring as much the added value to all this. I think mixed teams are the perfect thing to have. We cannot, of course, have 50 women, 50 female, 50 male teams. It's not possible. We only have mostly around 10 or 14% female in all the militaries. So how can you have 50-50 teams? We can, but then it's not, you know, the average is not the good one. So if you have 1 or 2 female in a group or a team, that's already a lot and good. So female soldiers can more easily get information from local women, but also men. Both men and women who are victims of sexual abuse are more likely to disclose, as I said before. And they're also models for local women, because sometimes, you know, even kids, when they see a woman in a military uniform doing a lot of things, say, oh my God, can we really do that? Or women, can they really do that? So maybe I could do more. Yeah, that's just something a bit funny. So how to integrate gender perspective? So females integrate male skills and abilities. That's what we're trying all the time. And males integrate female skills and abilities. So what happened is that there is a link over there. Down, we don't see it. Maybe I can give it later. We had these results for 2 people. This one was a result for a man, the chief of the legal office in ACT. He had a 73% female brain and a 33% male brain, which is great. And guess who was this one? It was me. So I have more, but my mother always told me I was different. So now I know why. So yeah, there is a link down there, so if you want to try, you can. So that's fun.
So that shows the masculine and female traits is what it's quizzing on.
Yes, how you think, you know, how you think. So this was probably a very, very sensitive person. I mean, he was an older man, so I think with experience, he became very, very sensitive. And I think because I'm in the military fighting every day for everything I wanted in my life, I probably became very, very pragmatic, and so I have 60% of me. Great. So this is also some other words that Rasmussen said. Our operational experience in Afghanistan demonstrates the enormous value of well-trained female military personnel and gender specialists. But at the moment we don't have enough of those key assets, which is really true. We have more than 20 people now deployed in Afghanistan doing being gender advisors, and we are not training them yet, or not enough. So that's an issue. Operational. Okay, this is something to read. Can we move this? Okay. This is a wrong perception. Pashtun men will be offended by the presence of American women. Pashtun women don't have enough influence to make valuable allies, which is wrong. The presence of female troops suits the Pashtun men, some Pashtun men, because I talked to one Pashtun man, he told me you should put some, because we're not all the same. The female Marines are told as a third gender, as I said, and extended the respect shown to men, but granted the access reserved for women. And here I just wrote that local women has much more influence than we think. That's most military. Yeah, I would like you to read this one. This is feedback from one of the female engagement things. No, that was in Iraq, sorry. So they came into a village. They took took a woman to a base to interrogate her without nobody. I mean, they took her away alone. So when she came back, people from the village didn't trust her anymore. She could have been raped or whatever. So what happened? The result of this was gender unsensitive mission was that they stoned the woman, and her husband killed himself because he couldn't protect her family. And so what was the military impact of all this thing was that we lost the confidence of the village and of the people and the whole region. So once you have lost this, you don't get it back for years. So you can leave this region. You can't do anything anymore. So just because we did this very bad action, or we didn't think about that, the operational effectiveness lost. Positive operational impact, yeah. We have, if you take rules of engagement, if we integrate gender perspective into rules of engagement, into operational planning, tactical operation, using both genders, training and education, and decision-making process also. Because when I brief people in my headquarters, I have 80 men at the table and no one woman. So that's not really very normal. If we have 16% of women, we should have at least 1 or 2 sitting at the table. So that's the last one. We are working on this one a lot in ACT right now. Not only integrating gender perspective into operations, but also into our everyday military life. Some ISAF gender advisors, they're really doing a great job. Not easy. And this is the team in ACT. So I work with Commander Kimberly Young. She is the U.S. Navy. She's the gender advisor. I'm her deputy, and we have also Lieutenant Colonel Uwe Bjelic. He's a man who's the gender training officer. So that was a quick. Sorry for my English. Sometimes just losing it. It's late. I tried very quickly to give you the large panel of what's gender, what we're trying to do in NATO, what nations are doing, and what is already done in operations, and that's a lot of things.
Maybe what we'll do is we'll have Matt present and then take questions.
Sure, okay.
Okay.
Why doesn't everyone stretch their legs for 2 minutes, and I'll just plug in this little
Yeah, I do. Thanks. How's that on purpose? It does. You have to go back. Ashley, you have to go to school before you go to the...
No, I go straight to the chest.
Really? You guys don't have like a basic course?
You're still here. You call it beef. Snow days.
Really? You won't be allowed to do it.
They have me as a so I very recently
When you get like the keys to... Sure.
Janine, what'd you like about it? Gender makes sense.
More people wanted to access these. And then if one starts
engagement team in Afghanistan in early 2009, which I was a part of when I was on my first deployment to Afghanistan down in Helmand province. And it'll sort of illustrate the bottom-up approach to a lot of these principles that you were just talking about, and sort of, I hope, illustrate why it's extremely useful to us in actually accomplishing our mission in Afghanistan, to be using and putting female warfighters, counterinsurgents, at the front lines. So, in early 2009, I spent part of my deployment out just on a combat outpost, a little fort of a platoon of Marines who were in a sort of, it was really just a bunch of poppy fields. Okay, we were in Opium Central. There hadn't been coalition forces there for a very long time, so we were trying to figure out where we were. We were getting blown up. I had IEDs going off for our logistics convoys and for our foot patrols. Right outside, and so I was working as an intelligence officer with the infantry company commander there to try to piece together who the people were who were putting bombs in the road, but also, and really even more important, who the people were that we needed to try to influence. Who were our potential allies? What were the blood feuds and the human terrain and history of this area where we were operating, so that we could figure out how to start dividing and locating people that could actually work with us, that would be more inclined to work with us, and to divide and identify and capture key Taliban members. So in the course of doing that, we pieced together, this is where we were just down in Helmand province, we started to piece together who some of the guys were who were putting bombs in the road, but we had a problem. The culture in southern Afghanistan and eastern Afghanistan is a very conservative kind of culture, Pashtun culture, a culture of honor that respects a code of conduct called Pashtunwali, which it really predates Islam. It's almost like Old Testament kind of rules about how you interact with one another. And it's very easy to run afoul of those local rules. It's very easy to disrespect local people and end up creating blood feuds and generating enemies needlessly. So we were aware of the fact that we could easily be offending local people if we were doing something as simple as laying eyes on local women. So we had the mission to finally cordon off a village in southern Afghanistan and to detain a few guys that we knew were putting these bombs in the road. We wanted to do this without losing the trust and respect of the rest of the village. So to go into homes, even though we had Afghan national security forces with us, we had Afghan army who would go into the homes to conduct the searches. We knew that because these men were not members of the family of a house, that we would end up offending local people. And so we had the need for female Marines to come with us on this mission, and a female interpreter to sit with the local women in this village and basically demonstrate that we, the Afghan National Army, and the male Marines were not going to lay eyes on the local women. You can see what happens from that little vignette you showed a minute ago in Iraq, of a woman being stoned to death because coalition forces took her out of sight from her family and from the village and started the rumor mill. Very serious risk, and very similar kinds of risks in southern Afghanistan. So another lieutenant and I, her name was Joanna Schaefer, pieced together a team of 7 female Marines and a sailor, a Navy corpsman, which is a medic. And I was able to get a female interpreter to go out on this mission with us. We did sort of a crash course, 7 days of quick language training, cultural training, practicing basic tactics and procedures as riflemen, as infantrymen, so that these female Marines could embed, and we decided to call it a female engagement team, with the male Marines and go on this mission. So we were really building on things that had occurred in Iraq called the Lioness program. I don't know if any of you had heard anything about the Lionesses, but that was sort of the prototype for what we were doing. But we decided to change the name because what Lioness teams were doing in Iraq, female Marines, were basically conducting searches. They were patting down women at checkpoints so that women couldn't show up with a suicide vest and blow up a meeting or government officers. We wanted to take that a step further and really focus more on the engagement aspect of, we're going to search, have our women protect themselves and search these homes, but we want them to also be able to sit down and talk at length with the local women and kind of explain what Marines are doing there in their AO, in their area of operations, and learn a little bit about where they were. So this is just one of our trucks that had gotten blown up in that area before we went in. And so on the morning of the mission, the female Marines' first mission put on headdresses. And there were a couple reasons for this. One was just out of respect for the local culture, but also to signal to men, local men who are watching from a distance, because when you've got all your gear on with the helmet and everything else, a female Marine looks like a male Marine. So if they're going to be going into local houses and men at a distance are watching, they're going to assume the worst, that we're going in there, disturbing the family, laying eyes on other, their neighbor's wife and so forth. So we had them put on that headscarf, and the male Marines who were providing security were always telling people, no, we've only got female Marines here who are actually going into the house. So the female Marines went in, searched one of the homes, and then I arranged with the village elder to allow all of the women in the village to literally just sit, have tea, have some food with the female engagement team, while the Afghan National Army then proceeded to search all of the homes. And so he agreed to that. We were worried that they would be offended by the whole notion, but it turned out to be quite the opposite. Over time we found that local Pashtun men were actually more willing to deal with female Marines than they were with male Marines. They just felt more comfortable with female warfighters. And it was the third gender point that you just brought out. They sort of viewed them as, with the same respect that they would have for strange men coming into their area, but also would afford them that access that only women can have to get into the inner household. So over the course of several hours while we were conducting our search, we ended up finding a couple of the guys who were putting bombs in the road. We found their IED making workshop with all the explosives and all the stuff hidden in a well outside one of the homes. And meantime, the female Marines are inside just talking, and the local women were terrified at first, but once they got talking, literally at one point we heard singing coming over the wall from this house, and they developed such a good rapport with these local women that it ended up paying dividends for us over the course of many months to follow. Just from them seeing who these strangers were, these foreigners showing up with all this gear, it not knowing who we were, assuming that we were Russians. Were often asked that. Who are you guys? Either Russians that are just back to make our lives miserable. No, we're the Americans to make your lives miserable. But it ended up paying a lot of dividends. So that's Joanna Schaefer there in the front, who led that first team.
Did they have a female interpreter?
They did have, yeah. A terrific woman who was, I think, 60 years old. Twice got blown up by IEDs. She was in vehicles that got blown up, got shot at, went on long foot patrols through cold weather and hot weather. She was just tough as nails because she believed so much in the mission. She was an Afghan from Kabul, ethnic Tajik, but spoke beautiful Pashto, and she was an American. I mean, she had immigrated to the United States. Key thing, none of this works without, it doesn't work well if you don't have a female interpreter. But although there are female engagement teams that have made it work, it sort of depends on the district that you're in. So we advise that we turn these female engagement teams into something more permanent, rather than an ad hoc thing of 1 week of training and running into the mission. We proposed and wrote out an after-action report saying that this needs to be something that is standardized. And the women need to be given significant training back in the U.S. before they get into country so that they're able to do the mission safely and more smartly. And at first we were rebuffed. There was the sense, there's just a lot of skepticism. So the main obstacle ended up being not the things that we expected. We expected the main obstacles to be local conservative culture and resistance by the local men to the female engagement teams. Actually, it was the opposite. We ended up, ironically, mirror imaging the Taliban and sort of restricting the use of our women as a means of reaching out to half of the population for fear of offending what turned out to really only be the Taliban. We did not find that that local people were offended by female engagement teams. So ultimately, it took an incident for the local commanders, Marine commanders on the ground, to decide to really start pushing this into a less ad hoc kind of a process. And that was one of the homes that Marines had chased some Taliban into. It got into a standoff, and there was a gunshot from within the house, and basically the Taliban took one of the local women, shot her hand off, and then sent her out of the house, just as sort of a diversion. So the Marines were, ended up providing care for her, and then saying through an interpreter, through bullhorn, let all of the women and children go out of this house. And so all the women and children did leave. The women were wearing burqas, and they were holding the kids by their hands, and they filtered off into the next village. And finally the Marines went into the house, and everyone was Taliban there. The Taliban had put on the burqas and left the village, and the Marines weren't able to search these women in their burqas for fear of committing that cultural foul. So suddenly they realized, what was that female engagement team thing that the last batch of Marines had attempted? And the general who was in charge, Brigadier General Larry Nicholson, was a huge proponent of employing female Marines in this role, and he ended up pushing it further. So that it's now a much more standardized kind of program. You've had now since more than 2 years and 3 cycles now of Marines who trained for months back in the U.S. before deploying to do full-time this kind of a mission, where they're attached to infantry and then going out and conducting meetings with local men as well as with local women, conducting searches, learning a lot about what was going on in those areas. So they're gaining a lot of valuable information, but also explaining why we're there. And it's really hard to overstate the importance of that. When people are going to assume the worst about us when we're on the ground there until you're able to actually interact with them. So without female counterinsurgents, we were able to do that. I usually chat with local men outside while this was going on. This guy was great. He actually said, we know that you men are here to fight, but the women are here to help us. And he was one of many people who would allow the female engagement teams access, to the homes. So I'd be happy to, I'm just going to stop there because I thought that you might have questions that would take this in any of a number of directions, just about how well it worked, what didn't work. You've got so many people here with military experience and who are going to, may actually be in a position to employ female engagement teams that I want to give you a chance to ask questions.
Maybe just touching on the female interpreter problem.
Sahana?
Oh, no, I was just going to hit the light.
Yeah. And as it expanded, were you able to recruit enough female interpreters to really support these so they could be effective? Or?
Constant struggle to, did everyone hear the question? Just finding good female interpreters was very difficult. We would get Afghan Americans who would come to Afghanistan, but always they would have the understanding that they would be sitting in an air-conditioned, building or tent back in the rear, interpreting written documents and so forth. But that's not what was needed nearly as badly as having women who were brave enough to embed themselves with a bunch of Marines and to go village to village talking to local people. So it takes someone like the woman that we had on that first mission. She was terrific. Yes?
What was the reaction from the female Marines inside of those teams? What kind of challenges were they reporting back to you as they were starting this up?
Mm-hmm. The biggest challenge was getting local area commanders, other Marine commanders, to buy into the concept. So there was frequently there was a lot of skepticism that female Marines would actually be beneficial. There was skepticism that even interacting with local Pashtun women would help us in our mission. But what we found very quickly over time was that the lower level commanders, meaning the ones who were really out there where the rubber meets the road, very quickly came to understand how useful that was. So they were requesting them. So more of the resistance came at the mid-level. Yeah, so much more frequently. It was commanders who were, to give them, in fairness, they were going to be held responsible if something went wrong. So there was a cautious streak among some commanders who weren't willing to go forward. And I've seen that continue. Less so, not with the Marines now. I've seen pretty aggressive use of these teams. With some of the Army brigade combat teams, also aggressive use. Other ones that just don't want to have anything to do with it.
So I know the Army, we had females in our 4 support companies in the battalions.
Right.
Are your female Marines, are they in the CSSG or?
Right. So they were with what the Marine Corps used to call CSSG. It was a Combat Logistics Battalion.
Okay. So
we already had female Marines in country doing jobs like they were radio operators, mechanics, truck drivers, medics. The beauty of them being Marines was that they had all had basic rifleman training. Every Marine will get some level of infantry training, so that it was easier to do something like throw together a crash course for a week and then have them out there patrolling, doing long foot patrols, knowing what their immediate action drills should be if a bomb goes off, if they get shot at, how to take care of one another with medical care and so forth. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, because
so
structure is a little bit different.
Yeah, it's different structure. It ended up we just needed the permission of that battalion commander, the
right.
Combat Logistics Battalion commander, his boss, and then the requesting infantry commander to say, let's make it happen. So they were all very supportive of that first team.